and the phantom of the gym. In a small town in Illinois, there was an old high school with a dark past. The gymnasium, built in the early 1900s, had witnessed countless basketball games, pep rallies, and school dances, but it also held a sinister secret, the ghost of a former student who had died tragically during a lockdown. It was a crisp autumn day when the school received a bomb threat. The principal immediately initiated a lockdown, and the students were instructed to stay in their classrooms. Julia, a junior, was in her gym class when the announcement came. The coach quickly ushered the students into the locker rooms, locking the doors behind them. The locker room was dimly lit and filled with the nervous chatter of students. Julia sat with her back against a locker, trying to stay calm. As the minutes turned into hours, the tension grew. Suddenly, they heard footsteps echoing through the gymnasium. The coach, Mr. Thompson, went to investigate, leaving the students huddled in fear. Julia could hear the faint sound of a basketball bouncing, but there was no game scheduled for that day. The footsteps grew louder, approaching the locker room. Mr. Thompson returned, his face pale. "Stay quiet," he whispered. "There's someone in the gym." The footsteps stopped just outside the locker room door. The doorknob rattled, and Julia held her breath. The door creaked open, and a figure stepped inside. It was a young man dressed in an old-fashioned basketball uniform, his eyes vacant and hollow. Julia recognized him immediately. He was Billy Johnson, a star player who had died in a tragic accident during a lockdown drill in the 1970s. According to the legend, Billy had been practicing alone in the gym when he was mistakenly locked inside. Panicked and unable to escape, he had died of a heart attack. Billy's ghostly figure moved silently among the students, his presence cold and unsettling. He seemed to be searching for something or someone. Julia could feel his icy breath as he passed by, and she closed her eyes, praying for the ordeal to end. The gym lights flickered, and a loud bang echoed through the halls. Billy's figure vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. Mr. Thompson quickly locked the door again, his hands trembling. The lockdown was lifted shortly after, and the students were allowed to leave the school. Julia couldn't shake the feeling of Billy's ghostly presence. She later learned that the bomb threat had been a false alarm, but the memory of that day haunted her. The gymnasium, once a place of fun and excitement, now felt eerie and foreboding. And whenever she heard the sound of a basketball bouncing in an empty gym, she couldn't help but wonder if Billy's restless spirit was still searching for peace. The library specter. In a quiet town in Maine, there was a high school with a reputation for its excellent library. The large two-story room was filled with thousands of books and had numerous cozy nooks for reading. But it was also the site of a tragic event that left a lingering presence, an event that would resurface during a school lockdown. There was a snowy winter day when the school received a warning of an armed intruder in the vicinity. The principal immediately ordered a lockdown, and the students were told to stay in their classrooms. A senior studying in the library when the announcement came. The librarian, Mrs. Carter, quickly locked the doors and instructed the students to hide. Emily and a few other students found refuge in a small reading nook on the second floor, their hearts pounding with fear. The library was eerily silent, the only sound being the faint hum of the heating system. Hours passed and the tension grew unbearable. Suddenly, Emily heard soft whispers coming from the shelves nearby. She peeked through a crack in the bookshelf and saw a shadowy figure moving among the aisles. It was a young woman dressed in outdated clothing, her face pale and sorrowful. Lee recognized her from old yearbooks. Besides, she was Alice, a student who had died in the library. Alice's story was well known in the town. She had been a quiet, studious girl who spent most of her time in the library. One fateful day during a lockdown drill, Alice had hidden in a remote corner of the library. When the drill ended, she had been accidentally left behind and had fallen from the second floor while trying to find her way out. Her death was a tragic accident that had left a dark mark on the school. Emily watched in terror as Alice's ghostly figure wandered the library, her eyes filled with despair. The whispers grew louder, and Emily could hear Alice calling out for help. The temperature dropped, and Emily felt a chill run down her spine. The intruder alarm turned out to be a false alarm, and the lockdown was lifted. As the students filed out of the library, Emily glanced back at the reading nook. Alice's figure stood there watching them leave, her eyes filled with longing. Emily couldn't forget the haunting encounter. She later visited the library alone, leaving a bouquet of flowers in the corner where Alice had fallen, hoping to bring some peace to the restless spirit. But whenever she studied in the library, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, and the whispers of Alice's ghost continued to echo in her mind. The Haunted Auditorium. In a historic high school in Georgia, the auditorium was a grand, ornate room that had hosted countless plays, assemblies, and concerts. But it also had a dark past, with rumors of a ghostly presence that appeared during times of crisis. One such encounter happened during a school lockdown that left students and staff shaken. The school had received a credible threat of a possible shooter, and the principal immediately initiated a lockdown. Students were instructed to stay in their classrooms, but the drama club was rehearsing in the auditorium when the announcement came. The director, Ms. Parker, quickly gathered the students and locked the doors, instructing them to stay quiet and hidden. The large, empty auditorium felt cavernous and eerie. The students huddled behind the stage curtains, their hearts racing with fear. As the minutes dragged on, they heard the faint sound of footsteps echoing through the room. As Parker peeked out from behind the curtain and saw a figure standing in the middle of the stage. It was a woman dressed in an old-fashioned evening gown, her face pale and eyes vacant. The students gasped in fear, recognizing her as the ghost of the auditorium. According to legend, the ghost was a former drama teacher named Miss Evelyn, who had died in a tragic accident during a school play in the 1940s. She had fallen from the catwalk above the stage, and her spirit was said to haunt the auditorium, especially during times of distress. Miss Evelyn's ghostly figure began to move slowly across the stage, her gaze fixed on the hidden students. The temperature in the room dropped, and a cold breeze swept through the auditorium. Ms. Parker and the students watched in terrified silence as the ghost approached the edge of the stage. Suddenly, the figure stopped and turned towards the auditorium doors. The footsteps of the supposed intruder grew louder, and the doors rattled violently. Miss Evelyn raised her hand, and the doors flew open, revealing an empty hallway. The ghostly figure vanished as quickly as it had appeared, and the footsteps ceased. The lockdown was lifted shortly after, and the students and Ms. Parker left the auditorium, shaken but unharmed. The threat had been a false alarm, but the memory of the ghostly encounter lingered. The students later learned that Miss Evelyn's spirit had been seen several times over the years, always appearing during times of danger to protect the students she had once loved. The auditorium, once a place of joy and creativity, now held a sense of foreboding, and the legend of the ghost of the auditorium lived on. The hallway apparition. In a suburban high school in Texas, a series of unexplained events during a school lockdown led to the chilling legend of the hallway apparition. This particular story involves a group of students who experienced a terrifying encounter in the school's main hallway. It was a warm spring day when the school received an alert about a potential threat in the area. The principal immediately ordered a lockdown, and the students were instructed to stay in their classroom. Michael, a sophomore, was in the hallway heading to the restroom when the announcement came. He quickly ducked into a nearby classroom, joining a group of students and their teacher, Mr. Davis. The classroom was dark, and the students huddled together, trying to stay calm. The minutes stretched into hours, and the tension grew unbearable. Suddenly, they heard footsteps echoing through the empty hallway. Mr. Davis cautiously peeked through the door's small window, but saw no one. The footsteps grew louder, and a faint whispering sound filled the air. Michael and the other students strained to listen, but the words were indistinguishable. Then they saw it, a shadowy figure moving slowly down the hallway. The figure was tall and thin, dressed in what appeared to be an old, tattered uniform. Michael's heart raced as he recognized the figure from an old school legend. It was said to be the ghost of a former janitor who had died tragically in a fire that had engulfed the school decades ago. According to the legend, the janitor's spirit roamed the hallways, searching for the students he had tried to save. The shadowy figure moved closer, and the temperature in the classroom dropped. Michael felt a chill run down his spine as the figure stopped outside their door. The whispers grew louder, and the doorknob rattled violently. Mr. Davis held his breath, praying for the ordeal to end. Suddenly, the figure vanished, and the hallway fell silent. The lockdown was lifted shortly after, and the students and Mr. Davis were allowed to leave the classroom. The threat had been a false alarm, but the memory of the ghostly encounter remained vivid in their minds. Michael couldn't shake the feeling of the janitor's presence. He later learned that the ghost had been seen by others during previous lockdowns, always appearing to protect the students in times of crisis. The school's main hallway, once a bustling corridor filled with students, now felt eerie and haunted, and the legend of the hallway apparition became a part of the school's haunted history.